Welcome back to the hills. If you think public land hunting is hard because you don't have the best gear or the most time, or maybe you think you're not walking far enough, that's probably not actually the case. I've killed deer on public land with average gear, short hunts, and setups that most people walk right past. And over the years, I've realized there are only a few things that actually matter out here, and there's a whole lot of stuff that really doesn't. So today I just want to talk about that, what actually matters on public land and what doesn't. One of the biggest lies that gets told, whether it's here on YouTube, social media, search engines on the internet, wherever it is that you're getting information from, is that you have to go further than everybody else, and that's just simply not true. The reality is you have to understand what pressure does to a deer on public land or even private land for that matter. I think about all these places that I hunt, and the reality is I would say about 90% of them are within a throwing distance of where other human activity might be. A deer does not survive by going 10 miles deeper into the wilderness. That's not the reality of what happens with a deer. They're not Casper. They don't just disappear. What'll happen is they'll shift their routes slightly, whether it's 100 yards up a hill or down a hill, or maybe they go through a thicker portion of the property that they're on, such as like a rhododendron patch or something of that nature, briar patch, whatever it is. Sometimes they just shift what time of day they move. You know, you were seeing them at 8 o'clock in the morning and now they're not moving till midday, or maybe the dreaded they went nocturnal on you. But the reality is they're still in that home range. A deer gets comfortable with the area that it's living in, and just because a human comes in doesn't mean they're going to leave. More or less what they're going to do is they're going to go in those little tiny nooks that they know that a human's not going into, whether it's because it's inaccessible or just simply a hunter doesn't think to look in there. Sometimes there's places where you'll see a boot track and you blow right past it, and the reality is you're blowing past spots that potentially could be really great spots. I will see all the time hunters just walking past something because it's either too easy to get to or they see other human sign. The list goes on why I see these guys walk past it. And if you'll just kind of slow down and think from the deer's perspective and think, if I was a deer and I know that a hunter is coming through this area, how can I, as easily as possible, get away from the pressure that I'm facing at this current moment? More important than pressure and access and other hunter activity, which is very important. I'm not saying to bypass it. You should definitely keep that in your thought process at all times. But more important than that is going to be wind direction. And it's been preached on so many times, and I plan on making another video of what I feel about scent control and things of that nature. But the reality is wind is the #1 most important thing when it comes to deer hunting. I have seen so many times, you know, a young hunter or a new hunter finally figure out where deer movement's at, and they key in on that spot, and it's a great spot, but the reality is they're hunting it on the wrong wind. Whether that wind is blowing straight down into the bedding or straight into the travel, whatever it is, the wind is going to blow them before that spot can ever come to fruition to begin with. And when it comes to wind, we're not just talking about the actual hunt itself. We're talking about the wind as we're hiking in. We're talking about the thermals as they change in the morning or the evening. There's a lot to it. And in Appalachia, wind is so hard because with these mountains and with these valleys, wind is constantly swirling. So it's not just something you can kind of look at the Weather Channel and forget it. You constantly have to be checking it throughout the day. And there comes a time, and I've done it several times, where if the wind changes for the worse, you need to leave. That's not a defeat. It's actually a victory if you think about it, because I would much rather get down early and without seeing a deer than to go in there and set on a spot because I know it's good and then blow it out for weeks to come simply because a deer whose nose is better than anything that you could even imagine busted me hundreds of yards before I even knew that it was in there. So just because I'm leaving the spot on a bad wind doesn't mean that I don't believe in the spot. It just means that I believe in it so much that I don't want to burn it out over one hunt where who knows what could happen in the future. Now, this next topic I'm going to speak on is a little bit controversial because I'm a believer that you should be in the woods any chance that you get, any chance that you have to actually experience the outdoors as a learning opportunity. It can be therapeutic at times, and honestly, for the average working man, such as myself or woman, you don't really get to set the schedule like one of these big time influencers or one of these professional hunters that you see on TV. But the reality is, timing is really important. You can hunt an average spot on the right day, and it'll be 100 times more successful than a great spot on the wrong day. Deer are still deer. No matter where you're at, a deer is still going to do what a deer does. The daytime movements are going to depend on things like weather and cold fronts and rut activity, and the list goes on and on and on. And learning to understand and adapt and predict deer patterns based off of those elements, it's a vital skill to have. Now, like I said, unfortunately, I understand that a lot of you guys and gals are having to hunt when you have the opportunity, and by all means do that. But do know that if you have the opportunity to be there at the right time, it is going to up your chances 100-fold. You can literally be in an average spot at the key moments, whether the weather's lined up right, the rut activity's lined up right, a cold front's come through, you've got a morning calm after a really high pressure system, whatever it is, you're going to be more successful in an average spot than you would be in a great spot on an average Saturday morning where that's the only time you had to go hunt. So if you have the luxury to set it up for those perfect times, whether you can use PTO at a moment's notice or if you're self-employed or whatever it is, definitely use those things to your advantage, because timing is a very crucial thing when it comes to deer movement. Now, the last piece that I think is truly important to a successful deer hunt is confidence. And I've talked about it so many times on my TikTok lives when I talk about scent control, which, like I said, we'll talk about that in a later date. But confidence is probably the most important thing to becoming successful. If you set up in a tree and start second guessing yourself, chances are you've already beat yourself. You're either going to get down too early, you're going to get fidgety, maybe you're going to get bored and be scrolling on social media, whatever it is. Confidence is that number one key factor that keeps you dialed in, locked in on the hunt, understanding what's going on, keeps your senses, at a highest peak of peaks. It's confidence. So you've done your scouting, you've got your wind implemented, you've figured out where the other pressure is. You've got a reason to be there. Own it. Pick a reason and own it. Whatever that reason is, whether it's you're on hot sign or you saw a deer there last weekend or you've had years of experience in this block of timber that you're hunting in and you've been successful year after year after year, pick your reason and own it. You can defeat yourself really, really quickly just by thinking to yourself, man, maybe I need to be 20 yards down, or maybe I need to be 15 yards over there, or maybe I need to be in a ground blind today, or maybe you're in a ground blind and thinking I need to be in a tree today. Those things will absolutely tear you down mentally. Deer hunting is a lot of a mental game. There's, the old saying that it's 90% luck and 10% skill, which I understand where that saying is coming from, but the truth of it is it's 90% confidence, 10% skill. Being confident that the work that you've put in beforehand is going to pay off. The dividends will return whenever you actually believe in what you're doing. Some of my best hunts, I sat up and started thinking to myself, well, this isn't exactly how I thought the morning was going to go, but I stuck to it. I stayed confident. I sat it out, and sure enough, I was successful. Think back to if you watched my Kentucky hunt. I had that big buck come through in the morning and never got an opportunity at him. I missed that little 3-year-old deer. Truth be told, my confidence was kind of sort of slipping, and I said, you know what? I know what I've done. I've put in the work. I'm going to be confident. I'm going to sit it through. And sure enough, that 130-inch 8-point came in, and the rest was history. Now, confidence doesn't mean being stubborn. It doesn't mean sitting in the same spot over and over and over because, oh, Jordan from Ammo said I have to be confident in the work that I did. That's not at all what I'm saying. Obviously, if it's not working, you need to get down, do your scouting, and figure it out. But being confident means making a plan and seeing it through to the end. Whether that end leads to you holding a deer or not, it means you need to see it through until there's nothing left to see through. Okay, we've talked about what is important. And those 4 key things that I spoke about, I believe, are probably going to be the most important things as far as your in-season hunting, what you need to be thinking about, the checklist. But let's talk about the things that aren't important. Number 1, and unfortunately we live in a consumer society now where everything and everyone feels like you have to buy the next best thing. And the reality is you do not need top of the line gear. This is not a anti-gear video. I love gear. Obviously, I have some great gear, whether it's my First Light clothes or my cameras or my bow, whatever it is. I love good gear, but the reality is it's not important. A deer does not care what camo you're wearing, and I know I'm gonna have all these brand specific fanboys in my comments, but the reality is a deer does not care what you are wearing. Gear does not fix bad decisions. Gear does not make you a better hunter. Gear does not give you an advantage over the next guy. The argument will come up, yeah, well, if I'm more comfortable, sure, I kind of understand what you're saying, but the reality is you cannot use gear as a crutch to avoid fixing the problems that are truly keeping you from seeing animals. If you're not checking your wind, if you're not reading the sign, if you're not reading the pressure, if you're not putting all these principles into place, it doesn't matter how comfortable you are in the tree stand. It doesn't. You can get it done in an hour and a half and not even have to worry about freezing your toes off if you're using those key principles to get yourself ahead of the curve. So maybe you don't have the best bow, maybe you don't have the best clothes, maybe you don't have the best tree stand, maybe you don't have the best property to hunt on. The reality is that is not what is preventing you from being successful as a deer hunter. What is keeping you from being successful is not going back to those core principles of woodsmanship. Another thing that you don't need, per se, is to go deeper than everyone else. I talked about it at the beginning of the video, how deer will adapt to hunting pressure. That is an inevitable fact. But pressure is not a straight line. There is no cookie cutter answer that will get you away from pressure. And going 5 miles does not automatically mean that you're out of the pressure, because guess what? There's a lot of dudes out there that are going 5 miles. There are so many people on the internet nowadays that are saying, go deep, go deep, go deep. Well, the reality is everyone's going deep. I have literally killed deer 50 yards away from the parking lot before. Going deep is not always the answer, and sometimes it's not the answer at all, because sometimes you can go so deep that you're away from the key things that a deer needs to survive, which is food, water, and bedding. If you go too deep, you're going to do more harm than you are good. So get out of this mindset that you have to go deep. You literally just have to get away from the pressure. And unfortunately, unless I am with you in the block of timber that you're hunting, or the ag that you're hunting, or whatever it is, I can't tell you. I cannot give you what that answer is. That comes up to you and your scouting and figuring out where humans are, figuring out where the deer are, and figuring out where you need to place yourself to intercept them in between the two. Which kind of brings me to, what are you actually looking for when it comes to deer sign, right? I preach on it, find the sign, find the sign, find the sign, but hot sign today could be cold sign tomorrow. I am really guilty of finding some really good sign, and instead of actually inspecting it and making sure that I'm in it and it's fresh, I'll sit up and hunt on it, and then all of a sudden there's no movement for a day or two, and I'm thinking to myself, what in the world is going on? And then I actually go back and check the sign that put me in that location, and I realize, hey, this is a couple weeks old. Or maybe you're the kind of hunter who you see deer tracks and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is where the deer are. A deer track doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the deer are. It just means that is where a deer has been. Now, there's exceptions to that. If you're finding deer tracks in fresh snow, or it's, there was a rain the night before and you find deer tracks, obviously that means movement, but that goes back to woodsmanship skills. You have to spend the time to develop that keen eye to understand what you're actually looking at in the woods and understanding if it is good sign or bad sign. On my video, I believe it's titled The Last Walk of the Season or of the Year, something of that nature. I'll link it somewhere up here. I kind of mention how a lot of times where I hunt on a specific property that I was hunting on, that I will blow past rubs, because to me a rub doesn't mean anything. 90% of the time when I'm seeing rubs, especially on those access routes, those rubs are left at night, and those rubs mean nothing to me. So I key in on things like scrapes or known travel corridors or things of that nature. The reality is the best sign that you can find is deer movement. Easier said than done, but if you spend enough time, you'll bump a doe bedded down, or maybe you'll bump a buck bedded down, and then you back out and you let the pressure rest for a little bit, and then hey, this is where I'm finding them at. I need to ease in here quietly and get set up, and then I can reinstate that confidence and everything that I spoke about earlier in the video. So the last thing I'm going to talk about that you don't need, and I want you to take this with a grain of salt, because obviously I'm basically saying that this entire video is hogwash by saying what I'm about to say, but you don't need social media to give you the answers. And like I said, you're probably thinking, well, then why did you just run your mouth for the last few minutes? But the reality is, I try to keep things pretty broad, because a lot of these tips and tricks that you're getting on social media, whether it's here on YouTube or if you're Google searching something or whatever the case may be, those tips and tricks aren't necessarily keyed in on your hunting area. They're not keyed in on your block of woods. I'm not saying that those tips and tricks are wrong. By no means. Obviously they're not. These people that are giving you these tips and tricks are, if you're watching them, they're probably pretty successful, and that's why you're getting your tips and tricks from them. But like I said, the reality is those tips and tricks work really good for the area that they are in. The things that I do here in my little area of Appalachia in Western North Carolina don't apply to the things that I do in West Virginia or Kentucky or Tennessee or wherever it is that I may be going to. I understand that I have to adapt and I have to overcome to the different geological locations that I'm at. Tips and tricks are just that. They're tips. It is not the whole solution. You as the hunter have to spend the time and and gain the woodsmanship skills to actually go out there. And then you have to understand that if you're hunting two different areas 50 miles apart from one another, the reality is the things that you do on property A are probably not going to be successful in property B. You're going to have to kind of manipulate it to work for whatever specific region or area or property that you're on. You have to kind of filter everything that you're given, including the things that I give to you. You have to filter the things that I say or people like the hunting public or whoever say through your own lens of experience, if you will. You have to take what someone like Seek One says as an urban hunter and filter it down through your own lens and put it into perspective of how will this work in the area that I'm hunting. And if it doesn't work, feel free to tear it up and throw it out. You do not have to use every little piece of advice that you're given. And if you do use it and you are successful in your area and you basically just copycat what example A did, you're not going to know how you were successful, and you're not going to know how to implement those things into the next piece of property that you go hunt or the next deer that you target or whatever it is. So, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. Understand that at the end of the day, the woodsmanship skills that you build are so much more valuable and so much more important, and honestly, so much more long-lasting than any guy running his mouth in front of a camera. So let me leave you guys with this. Public land hunting is hard because it's public. It forces you to think outside of the box. It forces you to not only understand the animal, but also to understand the other humans that are around you. And the other humans that are around you aren't necessarily just hunters. It can be anybody that uses the great public land that our nation gives us for whatever sort of enjoyment purposes that they use it for. Public land forces you to adapt. It forces you to make your own decisions. And sometimes those decisions are good, sometimes those decisions are bad, but regardless, you have to be able to learn from all of them. I think once you stop chasing the things that don't matter, such as the gear and all of these little trinkets that the internet will sell you to make you a better hunter, things get a lot simpler. Not easier, but simpler. I really appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you got anything good out of this, please leave me a like down below. If you have any of your own wisdom that you would like to leave behind, feel free to comment that down below also. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that this message is getting out there and heard by people that may need it, or maybe just by people that want it. But until next time, see you on the hill.